Hello, my name is Carl Weber. Welcome to Video-Aided Instructions Review for the United States Citizenship Test. In this program, I'll be teaching you what you need to know to become a naturalized American citizen. I hope that you'll find the lessons in this program helpful. Feel free to take notes as you listen, to pause the program, and to watch parts of the program again. Many people find that watching the program 2 or 3 times is a very good way to learn more. When you are finished, I hope you'll be ready to meet all the requirements to become the newest citizen of our great country. The rules and process for becoming an American citizen are set by the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, also known as USCIS. This process is called naturalization. Let's start this program by looking at the naturalization process. To be eligible to become an American citizen, you must be at least 18 years old. You also must be a lawful permanent resident of the United States for at least 5 years, or at least 3 years if you are married to a U.S. citizen. You also must have lived in the same state for at least 3 months before you apply. You must also have demonstrated, quote, good moral character, close quote, and, quote, an attachment to the principles and ideals of the U.S. Constitution, close quote. Good moral character means that you are a good person, not a criminal, a killer, or a thief, for example. You must not be unlawfully married to more than one person at the same time, for instance. These are some of the things that are meant by being a person of good moral character. And having an attachment to the principles and ideals of the U.S. Constitution means you believe in the American form of government. We call this form of government democracy. Later in this program, you'll learn a lot about democracy and how it works. You'll have a good chance to decide whether or not you believe in this form of government. Most Americans are very proud of our democratic system of government, and I hope you will be too. If you meet all these eligibility requirements and you want to become an American citizen, you'll need to file a form called the Application for Naturalization. It's also known as Form N-400. This form is a document that asks many questions about you and your background. You have to answer all the questions on the application form, sign it with your name, and submit the correct fee or payment along with the form. If you will be eligible for citizenship in the near future, you can file the application up to 3 months in advance. So, for example, if you will be eligible to become a citizen in September, you can file the application form in June, 3 months early. It's important to answer all the questions on Form N-400 carefully, correctly, and honestly. The form includes questions about many topics, including the following: your name and address, that is, where you live; your country of origin, that is, the country you come from; places you have lived; your job history, that is, the places where you have worked; any travels you have taken outside the United States; your marital history, in other words, your marriage or marriages, or divorces, if any; the citizenship status of your spouse and your family members, that is, what countries they are citizens of; your affiliation or membership with specific kinds of political groups; your criminal record, if any; your military service; and your readiness to accept the responsibilities of American citizenship. As you can see, the information required by the form is quite complicated. It will probably take you some time to complete the form. You may need to refer to other documents or papers to make sure that you give answers that are complete and correct. You may also need the help of someone whose knowledge of English is very good to make sure that you are understanding the form correctly and answering the questions in the right way. Don't rush as you work on the form. Spend several days working on it if necessary. Make sure Form N-400 is correct before you send it in. Mail the completed form to the USCIS Service Center that takes care of the area where you live. You'll need to include a money order for your application fee. You can get a money order at a bank or a post office near you. You'll need to include colored photographs, and you'll also need to send a copy of your permanent resident card, which used to be known as your green card. After your application is received by the USCIS, you'll receive an appointment for a time to have your fingerprints taken at a nearby office of the USCIS. This office is called the Application Support Center. Then you'll receive a notice telling you when and where to appear for an interview by USCIS officer. The length of time you must wait between filing your Form N-400 and being called for your interview will vary. In other words, sometimes it may take longer, sometimes it may happen more quickly. It depends on how busy the closest USCIS office is. At some offices where there are many applicants, there may be a wait of several months. At other offices, the wait may be shorter. If you visit the USCIS website at the address shown in your study guide, you can get an estimated waiting time for your closest office. When you apply for naturalization, you must be willing to take the oath of allegiance to the United States. An oath is a promise that is spoken aloud and in public. Allegiance means faith, devotion, or loyalty. So when you take the oath of allegiance, you are making a public promise that you will be loyal to the United States. Taking the oath of allegiance is the final step in the process of becoming a citizen. Let's take a look at the words of the oath of allegiance. It's important for you to know what they mean before you apply to become a citizen. Follow along with me as I read the words in the oath of allegiance aloud. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty, of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen, that I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by the law, that I will perform non-combatant service in the armed forces of the United States when required by the law, that I will perform work of national importance under civilian direction when required by the law, and that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. So help me God. The oath of allegiance, which we've just looked at together, contains some unusual and complicated English words. In fact, many people who grew up speaking the English language would find some of the words in the oath very difficult. So if you did not grow up speaking English, it wouldn't be surprising if you found the oath rather hard to understand. Let's go through the oath line by line, and as we read it, I'll explain what each line means. Let's begin at the beginning. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty, of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen. Let's look at this phrase by phrase. To declare on oath means to make a public statement that you promise is true. To renounce and abjure something means to give it up. So to renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity means to give up any former loyalty. So any other country that you've been loyal to in the past, you are now promising you are giving up that old loyalty. The oath refers to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty. And that means any other country in the world, or any leader of any other country in the world. So when we take all of these parts of the oath together, we see that this portion of the oath is saying that you will no longer be a citizen of any other country. So no matter where you were born or what kind of citizenship you may have had up till now, when you take the oath of allegiance, you are giving up all those other forms of citizenship and promising that you will be a loyal citizen of the United States alone. Next, the oath says that I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Well, let's talk about what this means. In this part of the oath, you promise to support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America. As you'll be learning later in this program, the Constitution is the highest law of the United States. You are promising here to be true to the Constitution and the other laws of our country. And you're promising that you will protect these laws if they are attacked by any enemies. For example, suppose you learned that someone wanted to hurt the United States by killing the president, by harming a member of Congress or a judge, or by cheating in an election. Your job as a good citizen would be to protect the country and the Constitution by trying to prevent these attacks. For example, you might tell a police officer that you'd heard about these attacks being planned so that the police officer could prevent them. This is what the oath refers to as protecting and defending the Constitution and the laws of the United States. And here you are promising that you will do your best to protect these laws and the Constitution against enemies. Next, the oath says that I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by the law, that I will perform non-combatant service in the armed forces of the United States when required by the law, that I will perform work of national importance under civilian direction when required by the law. Here, you are promising to perform service to help your country when it is needed and when the law says you must. There are, in fact, 3 different promises in this part of the oath. The first promise is to bear arms, which means to carry weapons or to serve as a soldier in the Army, Navy, or other military forces if necessary. This could be in a time of war, for example, or when the country is in danger by being attacked by foreign enemies, for instance. The second promise is to perform non-combatant service in the armed forces. Non-combatant means other than fighting. So here you are promising that you will do work other than fighting if needed to support the Army or other military forces. For example, in a time of war, you could be asked to serve in the Army as a cook or a medic, helping to heal injured soldiers, for example. These would be examples of non-combatant service. The third promise is to perform work of national importance under civilian direction. The word civilian means non-military. A civilian is a person who is not a member of the Army, Navy, or other military forces, but simply an ordinary citizen like you and me. So this part of the oath means that in some kind of emergency or time of trouble, if you as a citizen are asked to help the country in some way that does not involve military service, you will do it. Finally, the oath says that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me God. This means that you are making the promises in the oath freely without being forced. You are taking on the responsibilities of an American citizen because you want to. And you are doing so without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, which means that you are not lying, you are not trying to trick anyone, you are not holding anything back in your mind and keeping it secret. Instead, you are being honest and truthful in taking this oath. When you make this final statement, you will have taken on all the responsibilities of an American, and you will be a citizen just like someone who was born in the United States. The purpose of this program is to help you get ready to reach that point and to prepare you to take the oath of allegiance and join the millions of other Americans who have become citizens through the process of naturalization. This, then, is the naturalization process, which ends with you taking the oath of allegiance. If you have specific questions about this process that I haven't answered so far, or need more information about the process, there are several ways you can get help. You can visit the U.S. government website that deals with naturalization by going to the internet address shown in your study guide. You can also ask questions by calling the telephone number we've provided there. Finally, you may be able to get information about the naturalization process by visiting an adult education center, a community college, a public library, or a local government office in your neighborhood. Some towns offer classes to help people who want to become American citizens. Call or visit one of the places I've mentioned in your town or neighborhood and ask what kinds of help may be available for you. Now let's look ahead in the naturalization process. I'm going to assume that you are eligible to apply for American citizenship. That is, that you meet all the rules that say who is permitted to apply to become a citizen. I'm also going to assume that you have filled out your application form, N-400, and sent it to the USCIS together with the application fee or payment. Then you have been asked to visit the Application Support Center to have your fingerprints taken. And finally, you have been invited to the nearest USCIS office for an interview with an officer. This interview with the USCIS officer is the biggest and most difficult step in becoming a citizen. It will involve several things. You'll be asked a few questions about your Form N-400, the information it contains, and any supporting documents you have been asked to bring, such as your permanent resident card. Your answers to these questions will help the officer decide whether you are eligible to become a citizen. They will also help the officer decide whether or not you have good speaking skills in the English language. In addition, during the interview, you'll have to pass a brief English test that measures how well you can speak, read, and write in English, and a brief civics test that measures how well you know certain facts about American history, government, and civics. Later in this program, we'll offer advice about how to prepare for these tests. For now, let's take a few minutes to talk about how you can handle the interview correctly. It's very likely that the USCIS officer will begin the interview by asking you a few simple questions or making a few remarks that have nothing to do with your application for citizenship. The purpose of these remarks is to help you relax and feel comfortable. Don't worry about these kinds of remarks. Just respond in a friendly, appropriate manner. For example, the interviewer might say, "Did you drive here today or take the bus?" In response, you might say, "My brother dropped me off in his car," or "I took the bus. It only took a few minutes." The officer might say, "I hope you didn't have any trouble finding our office." An appropriate response might be, It was easy to find your office. The directions were very clear. If the officer says, "The weather is very cold today, isn't it?" you might answer, "Yes, it's cold today, but I don't mind cold weather." Or you might say, "It's cold, but I heard that it will be warmer tomorrow." The officer might ask you, "Would you like to hang up your jacket on this hanger?" You could reply, "Yes, thanks," or else, "No, thanks, I'll just keep my jacket in my lap." And when the officer begins to read your Form N-400, he or she might say, "The work you do sounds very interesting." You could respond, "Yes, my work is quite interesting, and it certainly keeps me busy." As you see, the purpose of this part of the interview is simply to help you relax and to feel comfortable talking with the officer. The officer will also listen carefully to the way you answer his or her questions, because remember, the officer wants to see whether you have good speaking skills in English. So think carefully about what the officer says and respond in a friendly manner, giving truthful information and speaking English as best you can. If you can understand what the officer is saying and answer the questions correctly, you'll do fine on this part of the interview. Now, suppose the officer says something you don't understand. Don't let that worry you. The officer will understand that your English may not be perfect. Just ask politely for an explanation. For example, you could say, "I'm sorry, but I don't understand your question." Or you could say, "Would you mind saying that again?" Or you could say, "I beg your pardon, but could you explain what you mean?" The officer will not be angry. He or she will repeat the sentence or use different words, and you'll probably understand better the second time. The officer will then ask you questions about your Form N-400. The officer will probably have a copy of your form on the desk in front of him or her. First, the officer will ask you to raise your right hand and promise to answer these questions truthfully. That is, to be honest in everything you say. The officer will then read the form and ask you some questions about items on the form. Most of these questions will probably be quite easy. Here are some examples of easy questions that the officer might ask you. How do you spell your first and last name? Is this your correct address? Do you have a job? What kind of work do you do there? How many times have you been married? Have you ever served in the U.S. Armed Forces? Listen carefully to the questions and answer them as simply and clearly as you can. If you can answer with a simple yes or no, that is fine. If an answer requires a little explanation, provide that explanation. For example, if the officer asks, "What kind of work do you do?" you might say something like, "I deliver supplies from the warehouse to offices all over the building," or "I'm an assistant in the bookkeeping department," or "I'm an electronics engineer," or "I'm a cook in the cafeteria during the breakfast and lunchtime hours." If you plan ahead and think a little bit about questions that the officer is likely to ask, you can prepare simple and clear answers like these and be ready to answer the question correctly when it is asked. It's possible you may be asked a more difficult question. Here are a few examples of the kinds of difficult questions that the officers sometimes ask. Have you ever been in a marriage that was annulled? Have you ever failed to file a required income tax return? Do you belong to the Communist Party or any other totalitarian political party? Have you ever received a suspended sentence or been placed on probation? Have you ever advocated the overthrow of any government by force or violence? If required, are you willing to perform non-combatant services in the U.S. Armed Forces? Now, all of these questions deal with topics that appear on the Form N-400. If you have filled out the form carefully and correctly, and have read over the form before your interview, you should be able to answer the officer's questions. When you are asked one of these difficult questions, listen carefully. If the officer uses a word whose meaning you don't know, or if you're not sure how the officer is using a particular word, ask for an explanation. For instance, you could say to the officer, "I'm sorry, but I forgot what the word annulled means. Can you please remind me?" The officer might reply, "It means a marriage that was canceled or declared void as if it didn't happen. Have you ever had a marriage like that?" Then you can respond, "Oh, yes, I remember now," and answer yes or no, whichever is correct. Or you could say to the officer, "Can you tell me what you mean by a totalitarian political party?" And the answer might be something like, "A totalitarian party is a party that is against democracy." Once you understand the question, you can reply correctly. For example, you might say, "Oh, I see. No, I have never been a member of a party like that." Sometimes a USCIS officer might make a mistake about some of the information on your application form. If the officer says something that's not true, you should politely correct what he or she said. For example, the officer might say, "So I see on your form that you haven't traveled outside the United States for a few years now. But suppose you did travel outside the country last year." You would have to correct the officer by saying something like, "No, I'm sorry, that's not correct. I went on a 2-week vacation last year to visit my family back home." Or suppose the officer looks at the form and says, "I see you've never been married?" If that's not true, you could politely correct the officer by saying, "No, I'm sorry, you're wrong about that. I am married." You see the idea. Listen carefully to the officer's questions. Make sure you understand what's being said, and answer all the questions as directly and honestly as you can. When you are in doubt as to what the officer means or how to answer correctly, ask politely for an explanation. Take it slow and don't get nervous. The officer doesn't really want to fool you. If you are prepared with the facts, your interview should go well. Here is some other advice for a successful interview. If you need a few moments to think about the correct answer to a question, say so. You might say, for example, let me think about that. Or you could say, I'm not sure. Give me a moment to remember. The officer will not mind. And saying this will make you feel less nervous because you'll understand that you can take a few minutes to think about the answer to the question rather than rushing yourself and perhaps giving an answer that's not true. If you aren't sure whether you have answered a question correctly or whether your interviewer understands you, ask the officer. For instance, you could say, "Does that answer your question?" or "Is that the information you need?" If the officer needs more information from you, he or she will say so. Most likely, the officer will simply say, "That's fine. Let's move on to the next question." Make eye contact with the officer. That means look the officer in the eye. In American culture, making eye contact with someone that you are speaking with is considered a mark of openness, honesty, and friendliness. You may come from a country with a different culture, where looking at a person in the eye is viewed as a sign of disrespect. It's considered a little bit rude to look at someone in the eye. If you come from a country with a culture like that, you'll need to change a little bit when you come to America, and in particular, when you are interviewed by the USCIS officer. Remember that in American culture, looking someone in the eye is a mark of honesty and openness, and you want to remember to do that during your interview. Say, "How do you do?" or "It's nice to meet you" at the start of the interview. These are polite greetings, and they will show that you are friendly, open, and happy to be meeting the USCIS officer. Say "please" when you ask for something. Say "thank you" when the interviewer provides help or at the end of the interview. Sit up straight in your chair. Keep a pleasant expression on your face and try to smile when you can. The interview with the USCIS officer is a serious business, but the officer is there to help you. If you approach the interview in a calm, relaxed way, and if you prepare for the interview by looking over your form beforehand so that you remember all the important information it contains, the interview will go fine. In addition to asking you questions about your application, the USCIS officer will give you the English and civics tests. The purpose of the English test is to make sure that you have a basic knowledge of how to speak, read, and write the English language. The purpose of the civics test is to see that you know about American government, our nation's history, and the responsibilities and rights of citizens. Study materials for both of these tests have been made available by USCIS. You can get these materials from the USCIS website at the address shown in your study guide. You may find these materials helpful for extra study after you complete this program. Also remember that if you fail either the English test or the civics test, you can apply to be retested. However, I hope that this program will help you to pass the test the first time so you can become a citizen as soon as possible. In the next part of this program, we'll take a close look at the civics test. The civics test deals with American government, history, and citizenship. There are 100 different questions that have been written for this test. However, you will not have to answer 100 questions. Instead, you will be asked just 10 questions. To pass the test, you must answer at least 6 out of the 10 questions correctly. The questions will be asked orally, that is, in speaking by the officer, not in writing. You will only be asked 10 questions, but there is no way to know in advance which questions will be chosen. The 10 questions you'll be asked may be from any of the 100 questions that have been written. So it's a good idea to prepare for the test by studying all 100 questions. One good way to prepare is to study civics flashcards, which are available for free online. To get a set of these flashcards, visit one of the web addresses shown in your study guide. These flashcards contain questions and answers that you can practice whenever you have a few minutes to study. Let me show you what they look like. When you download the flashcards from your computer, you'll find that you can print them out in a form looking just like this. The way you prepare the flashcards to use in studying is by taking a pair of scissors and cutting along the line down the middle of the page, as shown on the printout. Each page that you cut will now look like this. Then fold the flashcard along the fold line down the middle, and you can use a piece of tape or a staple to seal the edge. Now you have a flashcard which contains a question on one side and the correct answer on the other side. If you carry a batch of these flashcards with you at all times, you can study whenever you have a few moments. For example, if you're riding the bus to work, or if you're eating lunch by yourself, you could take out the flashcards and go through a few of them and practice for the citizenship test. The way you practice is by looking at the side that contains the question. In this case, it's question 1. What is the supreme law of the land? Try to think about the question and answer it without looking at the answer. When you think you know the answer, turn the flashcard over, and you'll see the answer on the other side, the Constitution. The flashcards can also be used to study for the test with a friend who is also preparing to become a citizen. One person can hold the flashcards while the other person answers the questions. These flashcards are a very handy way to study, so visit the website whose address is listed in the study guide and get a set of the flashcards. You'll find that they will help you, in addition to this program, to prepare for the civics test. By the way, if you are an older person applying for U.S. citizenship, the rules regarding the civics test may be slightly different for you. If you are 65 years or older and have lived in the United States as a legal permanent resident for at least 20 years, the civics test will be a little easier for you. You only need to study 20 questions rather than all